Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we've got something big for you. It's the Anime Reborn Unit Stair List Update 5. We're ranking all the units from best to worst. So if you've been wondering where your favorite characters land, you're in the right place. Whether they're dominating the game or falling behind, we've got it all covered. Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy the content. And don't forget to subscribe for more Anime Reborn updates and tier lists like this one. Now, let's jump right into the Anime Reborn Unit Stair List Update 5, from best to worst. D-tier units. Arlen. Arlen is a rare unit with no special abilities. His stats are just average and won't do much for your team, so he's definitely one you want to replace once you get better units. Emily. Added in Update 3. Emily doesn't bring anything special to the table. No special abilities or passives, just basic stats that make her weak compared to other options. Hitona. Hitona, like Emily, has no useful skills or passives. She's another unit that you'll want to bench once you start progressing further in the game. Ichigo. Ichigo has decent range and targets air units, which can be helpful in the early stages of the game, but his lack of damage output means he quickly becomes outdated as you progress. Inoki. With poor range and low damage, Inoki doesn't bring much to the table. He's a unit you won't find much use for in later stages of the game. Garrett. Garrett has no passives and no special abilities. He's simply a filler unit that lacks any meaningful contribution to your team. Kurulin. Kurulin can target air, but that's about it. His weak stats make him pretty irrelevant as you move into mid and late game content. Lagfi. Lagfi has a Koneo attack, but his overall damage is underwhelming. He's decent for early stages but falls off as soon as you unlock stronger units. Leo. Leo's burn damage and ability to break shields are nice, but his slow SPA and low DPS make him much less effective compared to other units in his tier. Magma. Despite having a burn effect, Magma's overall damage output and utility are subpar. He just doesn't stand out as a must-have unit. Mr. Set. Mr. Set's Porio and the fact that he can only target ground enemies make him ineffective against flying enemies, which limits his use. Mukwari. Mukwari has a passive that only works when he's stunned, which makes him incredibly unreliable. He's best left off your team. Moratu. Another weak unit. Moratu has no passives and is just another generic unit with lackluster stats. He doesn't do much for your team. Naruto. Naruto has a passive that boosts other Narutos nearby, but that's not enough to make him a standout. His overall performance is just not impressive. Saber. Saber's passive adds extra damage, but it's a minimal boost. When you compare her to other options, she just doesn't measure up. Sakura. Sakura is a weak rare unit. She's cheap to place, but her lack of significant power makes her more useful for beginners than advanced players. Sasuke. Sasuke is slightly better in terms of DPS than some of the lowest tier units, but still not enough to make him competitive in the long run. Tintin. Tintin's passive gives a small attack boost to nearby units, but it's not enough to make him relevant in high-level content. Usagi. Usagi can target air, but with his low stats and lack of power, he doesn't make a major impact on your team. Yamcha. Yamcha has poor stats and range, and his lack of abilities make him an overall weak pick for your team. Zero. Zero has low DPS and can easily be outclassed by other rare units. He's just not a unit you'll want to invest in long-term. C-tier units. Gurdon. Gurdon has decent stats but lacks any real special abilities or passives. His range and damage output are not enough to make him a top-tier pick, especially later in the game. Hei. Hei has a decent Teo attack, but the damage just doesn't scale well enough for higher levels. He's better than some of the D-tier units, but still doesn't stand out in late-game content. Jonas. Jonas has decent utility, with a ground targeting attack that's useful early on. However, his stats and performance fall off pretty quickly as you progress. Killa. Killa's AO attack can be handy in some situations, but his low damage and lack of useful passives make him much less effective in the long run. Neja. Neja's ability to target air enemies is great, but her stats are just average. She can hold her own for a while but doesn't have the raw power to compete in later waves. Noelle. Noelle has decent damage output, but her single target attack and low range make her a bit limited compared to other units in this tier. Still, she can be useful in specific situations. Nanami's ability to target air enemies is useful, but her low DPS and lack of abilities make her less impactful in the later stages. She's good for starting out but falls off after a while. Nezuko is a strong unit at first, but his slow attack speed and lack of AO damage make him less effective in higher levels. He's a solid pick early on but not for long-term use. Orekamira's basic stats and lack of special abilities hold him back. He's reliable for early stages but doesn't provide much for your team once you have more powerful units. Pun has solid damage, but it's single target, and his stats aren't anything extraordinary. His lack of passives makes him harder to scale into mid and late game content. Red Boss is decent for farming, but his stats are underwhelming for higher stages. His lack of abilities and scaling potential make him a filler unit in most team compositions. Saijin's AO attack is nice, but the lack of high damage means it won't cut it for advanced levels. He's decent but still outclassed by many other units. Toburamo's single target DPS can be useful at times, but without any unique abilities or passives, he doesn't offer much versatility for endgame content. Turbo Grandmother has a decent AO attack, but her low damage output and slow attack speed make her inefficient compared to faster, stronger units. Urain has decent range, but her DPS doesn't quite match up to other C-tier units. Her lack of a special ability or passive holds her back from being a top pick. Ryu's damage scaling is decent, but his range and ability to only target ground make him less versatile compared to other picks in this tier. Yasuke has an AO attack and targets both air and ground, but his overall DPS is lacking, making him ineffective in later rounds. Zenith's ability to attack both air and ground enemies is useful, but with low damage and slow attack speed, he doesn't shine in later stages of the game. B-tier units. Boulder Lee has great tanking ability, and his solid damage output makes him a reliable pick for your team. His ability to absorb hits can make a big difference in some situations. Cod's range and AO attack are great for clearing mobs, but his damage output can fall off a bit in the later stages. Still, he's a strong pick early on and solid in mid-game. Darkbeard brings a lot of power to the table with his high damage. While his attack speed is slower than others, his burst damage makes him effective in crowd control and clearing strong enemies. Droid 18's high DPS makes her a fantastic unit for targeting both air and ground enemies. She's versatile and does well in many situations, but her lack of unique abilities can hold her back against tougher enemies. King Rimura's ability to target both ground and air, combined with his decent AO, makes him a valuable unit. He's a great all-rounder and does well on both early and mid-game content. Kuzer has solid DPS and a nice range, making him a great mid-game unit. His ability to deal with both air and ground enemies makes him versatile, but he doesn't shine as brightly as some of the higher-tier units. Lucky One is a reliable pick with decent stats. His ability to target air and ground and decent DPS make him a useful unit, though his overall performance doesn't quite make him a top-tier choice. Octawalk can clear mobs with ease thanks to his AO attack and solid range. However, his DPS is on the lower side, so he's a good option for crowd control, but not a powerhouse for single-target enemies. Pain has solid damage and can target both air and ground, making him a useful unit in many situations. His DPS may not be the highest, but he's still a reliable addition to most teams. Picora Yellow excels at mob control with decent AO damage, and his range gives him an edge over some other units. However, his damage isn't as high as some of the top-tier picks, so he's not the strongest choice for endgame content. Ray's ability to deal high single-target damage makes him a great boss killer, but his lack of AO can limit his usefulness in large waves. Still, his high DPS makes him a great choice for certain situations. Rogan's AO and decent range make him a reliable pick for dealing with mobs. His stats are solid across the board, and his ability to target both air and ground adds versatility to your team. Rookie is a good all-around unit with solid DPS and decent abilities. He can handle both ground and air enemies effectively, but lacks the extra edge that higher-tier units have in the long run. Sensei Sensei's ability to boost other units with buffs is what sets him apart. His decent DPS combined with his support role makes him a valuable asset for teams, especially if you want to focus on buffing your strongest units. Tashrio. Tashrio is a versatile unit with a decent AO attack. His stats are solid, and he can be a great pick for both mid and late game content, though he may be outclassed by some higher tier units in specific roles. Yungasa's strong AO damage makes him great for clearing waves of enemies. His stats are decent, but his damage output can sometimes fall off against tougher enemies in the later rounds. A-tier units. Aokojo. Aokojo has a solid mix of high damage and great range. His AO attacks help clear large waves of enemies, and his damage output can rival some of the higher tier units. A solid pick for mid and late game stages. Brulio. Brulio's AO damage and ability to target both ground and air enemies make him a reliable option for handling a variety of situations. His DPS is strong, and his abilities allow him to stand out in many team comps. Bulba. Bulba brings both tankiness and high DPS to the table. His ability to soak up hits while dealing strong damage makes him perfect for dealing with tougher enemies while still contributing to your team's offensive output. Delta Brothers. The Delta Brothers have solid synergy when paired together, and their damage and AO make them perfect for clearing out mobs quickly. Their ability to focus down multiple enemies at once makes them a strong pick in many situations. Dama. Dama's high single target damage and ability to deal with stronger enemies make him a great boss killer. He might not have the best AO, but his performance against high health enemies makes him one of the best for specific boss fights. Gaan. Gaan is a powerhouse with excellent DPS, especially when it comes to dealing with both air and ground units. His ability to dish out consistent damage while handling different types of enemies makes him a reliable unit. Gromjaw. Gromjaw is perfect for those looking for a tanky unit that can also dish out decent damage. His ability to control the battlefield with his survivability and AO makes him a great pick for many team comps. Oda. Oda's high damage output and great range make him one of the top choices for both air and ground enemies. His versatility allows him to be used in multiple scenarios, making him a must-have in many teams. Asta. Asta shines with his AO damage and solid DPS. He's effective for crowd control, and his ability to target multiple enemies at once makes him a valuable asset, especially in larger waves. Psycho. Psycho's unique abilities and solid DPS give him an edge in both mid and late game. His ability to deal damage while also supporting your team with buffs makes him one of the more versatile picks in the A tier. Speedcart. Speedcart's ability to deal with both air and ground enemies with high speed makes him one of the more reliable units in terms of DPS. His quick attack speed and mobility give him an advantage in many different situations. Sun Prodigy. Sun Prodigy excels at dealing consistent AO damage, especially with his range and ability to hit both air and ground enemies. His damage output is solid, and his versatility makes him a great pick for mid-game content. Super Gao. Super Gao is a strong unit that brings high single target and AO damage to the table. His stats are solid across the board, and his ability to shine in both offensive and defensive roles makes him a top pick. Time Wizard. Time Wizard has excellent damage potential and can manipulate the flow of battle with his unique abilities. He might not be as tanky as some other picks, but his DPS and utility make him an essential unit for many teams. Vigoto. Vigoto's combination of AO damage and ability to hit multiple enemies at once gives him an edge in many situations. His strong DPS and solid survivability make him a reliable pick in late game content. Yamo. Yamo's powerful damage and range make him one of the top contenders in the A tier. His high DPS and AO attacks make him an effective choice for clearing large waves of enemies, as well as dealing with tough single-target bosses. Alright, we've reached the final tier, and these units are the best of the best at the S tier. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this, and let's jump straight into it. S tier units. Aizan. Aizan is a top-tier unit with high damage and incredible versatility. His ability to deal with both ground and air enemies efficiently makes him a standout in any team. His special abilities and stats make him a must-have for high-level content. Android 21. Android 21 is an absolute powerhouse. With her combination of devastating damage, utility, and high survivability, She can dominate almost any stage. Her ability to deal with multiple types of enemies and provide buffs is what makes her top tier. Bruce is one of the most powerful units in the game. His AO damage and ability to target both air and ground units make him incredibly useful. His raw damage output is insane, and he can handle almost anything thrown at him. Dragon Emperor brings the heat with an insane amount of damage, especially with his massive AO range. He excels at taking down large groups of enemies and is a must-pick for tough late-game scenarios. Greybeard is an all-around beast with his high DPS and tanky